Okay, welcome everybody to the channel. This is a channel dedicated to articulation, and we are reading Aristotle on rhetoric. So let's get started. The study of rhetoric began in Greece in the 5th century BC. Democratic government was emerging in Athens and some cities, based on the assumption that all citizens had an equal right and duty to participate in their own government. To do so effectively, they needed to be able to speak in public. Decisions on public policy under the democracies were made in regularly held assemblies composed of adult male citizens, and, as in England town meetings, anyone who wished to speak. Not surprisingly, however, the leadership role in debate was played by a small number of ambitious individuals called rhetors, who sought to channel the course of events in a direction they thought was best for the city or themselves. There were no professional lawyers in Greece. If people wished to seek redress in the courts for some wrong done them, and the Greeks were very fond of going to law, or if people were summoned to court as defendants, they were expected to speak on their own behalf. There were other occasions for public address in connection with public holidays or funerals, as well as more informal discussions as symposia or private meetings. In modern society, the ability to communicate effectively is at least as important as it was in ancient Greece. And through television and radio, a speaker can reach a much larger audience than was possible in the past. Most of us do not aspire to a public career and may never make a speech to a large audience, but almost all of us feel a regular need to persuade someone of something, to defend our actions, and to organize our thoughts so that others will understand our point of view. To do this, we speak personally to individuals or small groups, or we write reports or letters. Furthermore, to a greater extent than in the past, we are constantly being addressed by others, politicians, salespeople, preachers, or teachers, and we need to understand the techniques that are using if we are correctly to judge the importance or validity of what they say. Not surprisingly, the study of rhetoric has enjoyed increased popularity in the second half of the 20th century, with its arisen and renewed interest in Aristotle's rhetoric as the source of our basic understanding of communication skills. Today, as in Greece, some people seem to have a natural gift for communication. Others can develop these skills by coming to understand the principles of speech and composition, by observing the method of successful speakers and writers, and by practice. To meet the needs of students in Greece, teachers called sophists emerged who took students for pay and taught them how to be effective in public life by marshalling arguments, dividing speeches into logical parts, and carefully choosing and combining words. In the history of rhetoric, the most important of these teachers was a man named Georgius, who came from Sicily to Athens in 1427 BC, and made a great impression on his audiences by his poetic style, and made a great impression on his audiences and paradoxical arguments. Some of the lesser figures began to publish short handbooks on the art of speech, concerned primarily with showing how to organize speech in the law courts in a clear and orderly way, to arouse emotions of the audience and argue on the basis of probability of what people might expect to have done in a given situation. Socrates and his student Plato distrusted the teaching of both the sophists and the handbook writers, and Plato's dialogue Gorgias is the earliest example of an attack on Plato's rhetoric as essentially a form of flattery, morally irresponsible and not based on knowledge of the truth. The debate over the role of rhetoric in society has existed ever since, and there are still people today whom the word rhetoric means empty words, misleading arguments, and appeal to based emotions. There are dangers in rhetoric, i.e. political extremism, racism, and unscrupulous sales techniques. But by studying rhetoric, we can become alert to its potential misuse and learn to recognize when a speaker is seeking to manipulate us. There is great positive power in rhetoric as well, which we can use to validate ends, used for valid ends. It was by persuasive preaching and thus by rhetoric that St. Paul, the other apostles and successors brought Christianity to the world. That's interesting. And it was by rhetoric that founding fathers organized public opinion in the cause of American independence. Rhetoric has also helped black leaders, women, and minority groups begin to secure their rights in society. Aristotle was the first person to recognize clearly that rhetoric as an art of communication was morally neutral, that it could be used for either good or for ill. Its persuasion, he says, depends on three things: the truth and the logical validity of what is being argued, the speaker's success in conveying to the audience the perception that he or she can be trusted, and the emotions that a speaker is able to be awakened in an audience to accept the views advanced and act in accordance with them. Modern rhetoricians use terms derived from Aristotle to refer to these three main means of persuasion. Though they have somewhat broadened definitions, as the notes to the translation will indicate, logical argument is called logos, the projection of the speaker's character is called ethos, awakening the emotions of the audience is called pathos. Aristotle wrote his treatise on rhetoric in the middle of the 4th century, but it has been more studied in modern times than it ever has since the Middle Ages. Most teachers of composition, communication, and speech regard as work that organizes its subjects into essential parts, provides insights into the basis of speech acts, creates categories and terminology for discussing discourse, and illustrates and applies its teachings so that they can be used in society. Although Aristotle largely limits the provenance of rhetoric to public address, he takes a broad view on what that entails than most modern writers on communication. This often surprises and interests readers today. He addresses issues on philosophy, government, history, ethics, and literature. And in Book 2, he includes a comprehensive account on human psychology. In Aristotle's view, speakers need to understand how the minds of their listeners work. And in this process, we come to understand something of who we are and why we do what we do. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger has called the second book of rhetoric the first systematic of the everydayness of being with one another. Modern theorists frequently refer to the rhetoric as a source of ideas about communication, and as the basis for rhetorical analysis or criticism of speech and discursive writing. It also has some application to the analysis of literature and regularly draws examples from poetry and drama. There are, of course, other ways of approaching rhetoric today. Some of them consciously anti-Aristotelianism, but the distinctive contribution of these other approaches can often be better understood when compared with Aristotle's. Among major modern theorists of rhetoric, like Aristotle, Perelman regarded argumentation as the most important element in rhetoric. He remarks, "It is sufficient to cite the rhetoric of Aristotle to show that a way of looking at rhetoric can take pride in illustrious examples." A widely read book by Stephen Toulmin, uses of argument is also strongly Aristotelian. Kenneth Burke's very different approach to rhetoric recognizes the subject, but he probably could not have written books had not Aristotle gone first. And understanding Burke requires an understanding of Aristotle, to whom he frequently refers. Many textbooks, such as Edward P.J. Coburt's Rhetoric for Modern Students of English Composition, base their theories squarely on Aristotle. As Coburt remarks, with his philosophy's treatise, Aristotle became the fountainhead of all later rhetorical theory. And he continues with a quotation from Lane Cooper, one of the founders of the modern study of rhetoric. The rhetoric not only of Cicero and Quintilian, but of the Middle Ages, of the Renaissance, and of modern times, is, in its best elements, essentially Aristotelianism. Even Edwin Black's well-known attack on neo-Aristotelianism criticism is not so much an attack on Aristotle as demonstration that modern critics have failed to understand him. One reason may be the unsatisfactory editions from which they have worked. The rhetoric is a difficult work, and modern readers need considerable help in reading it. Difficulties result sometimes from uncertainty about what Aristotle actually wrote. Since we are dependent for the text on handwritten copies made in the Middle Ages, which do not always agree. More often, the difficulty comes from Aristotle's style, which is compressed in the extreme. Words, thoughts, or transitions need to be supplied to make the argument clear. Another problem results from the fact that he wrote different parts of the work at different times, and his ideas or point of view changed as he taught different groups of students. Although he completed some revisions to bring parts of the work written earlier into agreement, there remains inconsistencies in what he says and in terms he uses. There is thus present in the text as a whole kind of dialogue in Aristotle's mind between two views of rhetoric, one making strong moral and logical demands on the speaker, one looking more towards success in debate. This can be confusing to a reader, but exploring the issues can also be a positive feature of studying Aristotle. The differing views found in the text, especially when taken in conjunction with Plato's criticism or Socrates' celebration of rhetoric, can provide a strong starting point for discussions by modern students about the nature and functions of rhetoric in society. Thank you, everyone.